Hey everybody, welcome to MREA Mastermind, session number 8. We're going over the MREA budget model today, pages 192 through 195. So please make sure you are ready with your book out. You've got a highlighter and a pen. We're going to dive into this, and we're going to have a great session today. So let's go ahead and jump into the reading. So on page 192, now remember, we've gone over the budget model already. Yes, we've already gone over this, and what we're going over today now is the MREA tweaks to that, the MREA version of that budget model. Now, this just means it accounts for more things because it's a bigger business at this point. So as you're going to see on page 192, he says this, a little into the first sentence: the budget model of the Millionaire Real Estate Agent, figure 40, is a more high-level look at your spending. So he talks about the fact that a budget's important, and it's definitely a powerful tool. However, the MREA budget model is a higher level look at that, right? So it looks more specifically into certain areas, which we're going to talk more about. What it does is highlight those areas where your focus and attention will pay the highest dividends. Now, what we know in your budget and in your spending and in your business, not everything is created equally. What he's saying here is some things you spend money on are going to give you a bigger return, and yet some things are going to give you less of a return. So what we know to be true, what we absolutely know to be true, is that we have to look at those very specific areas that produce the biggest return if we want a predictable outcome and big success. Now, he goes on to say this: the Millionaire Real Estate Agent's budget model is divided into two broad categories. Guys, this is where I'd star, circle, underline, and highlight. This is huge, so important. Into two categories. The first is cost of sales. The second is operating expense. So right there, make sure you underline those two. The MREA budget model is divided between those two: cost of sales and expense. Guys, operating expenses are a massive part of your business. So are cost of sales. And we're going to see together they're almost 3/4 of your total GCI. So what we know is you're going to want to make sure you're looking at these specific areas. He goes on to say, now, to be the most effective you can be and get the most out of the investment you're making, you should be able to explain why every budget item is there, why it's a certain amount, and exactly what you expect to receive from it. Now, if you're like me, you probably can't do that with every expenditure and every budget item in your business. And that's okay. If that's you, if that's your reality, then that's okay. The role here of this budget model is to give you the mechanism to be able to do that, to be able to have that clarity around every part of your budget model, every part of the expense and operating expense inside of your business, to know why you're spending money on it, how much you're spending, and what your projected or anticipated return for spending that money will be. Now, he goes on, next paragraph down there, bottom 192, your cost of sales. This is a big distinction here. We're going to start learning between cost of sales and operating expense. Your cost of sales reflects the actual costs of capturing and converting your leads to sales, which would be handled by your seller specialist or listing specialist and your buyer specialist. Now, a question I get oftentimes in coaching people who want to build teams. This next couple pages answers most of the questions I get, because here he goes. He outlines exactly what a listing specialist on a traditional team does. They're responsible for 5 key activities. Number 1, converting seller leads into appointments. Number 2, making listing presentations. Number 3, securing those listings. Number 4 continues on page 194, the top of 194. Number 4 is handling communications during the marketing period. And number 5, negotiating purchase offers. Now, a couple thoughts here. First, a big challenge with a lot of teams is agents think that if I'm a listing agent or I'm a buyer's agent, I get to come in, I get to go hunt and gather, bring it in and drop it and never touch it again. Well, the problem with that is you're the one that's licensed. You're the one that's helping the consumer. So even if you have an administrative assistant, even if you have a team transaction coordinator, even if you have all this leverage, you still yourself are involved and expected to be a part of the communication process. You never get to completely let that go. Gary says it right here. You never get to let that go. You are still an integral part of that communication, and you should be from contract to close. Now, he goes on to say this: we recommend this individual be paid a salary plus bonuses based on specific criteria, such as the number of listings taken, number of listings sold, or the net profit of the business. Depending on the market, talent for this position will demand between a $65,000 and a $100,000 a year salary. Now, what's interesting, guys, is this still plays out the same way today. This salary number is still pretty darn accurate from what I'm seeing today across the country. As a base salary for your listing specialist, if you're going to have one, this still is a fairly accurate range. Now, he goes on to give more specifics into the buyer agent side of things. Your buyer specialist, this is the middle of 194, your buyer specialist is responsible for 6 key activities. So now hear me too as we're going through this. Maybe you're a single agent and you don't have a team. Well, you're both a listing specialist and a buyer specialist. So knowing what these key points of your jobs are, that's going to be important for you. Or if you're building a team, know what you should expect these people to do for you. Here are the buyer specialist's 6 key activities. Number 1, convert buyer leads to in-office presentation appointments. Underline in-office. In-office. Got to get them into the building. That's the number 1 priority for the buyer's agent. Number 2, make presentations. So once we get them into the office, present our buyer presentation. What we're going for at that point, obviously, is a buyer representation agreement, or as Bold and Gary call it, a buyer listing agreement. Number 3, secure the buyer's listing. That's what we're just talking about. Number 4, show houses, actually do the showing. Number 5, negotiate purchase offers. And number 6, handle communications from contract to closing. Again, you never get to fully give up your communication or part in the process. Now, here's what's interesting. If you look at that list of 6 things, this is total side note, but I want you to hear me clearly in this. You look at this list of 6 things, 6 key activities that a buyer specialist is supposed to do. The 4th is show houses. And yet most buyer's agents, when you ask them what their job is, they go straight to number 4. Oh, my job is to show homes. Well, the only problem with that is if you're not converting buyer leads in office presentations, if you're not presenting to those very people once they're in office and you're not getting buyer representation agreements, you have no one to show homes to. So just like as an agent, our job is lead generation. It's not selling homes, it's lead generation. That is the actual job. As a buyer's agent, the actual job that you do that you get paid for, it's not showing houses. That's 4 steps down the line. Your actual job is to convert buyer leads into in-office meetings and presentations. Now, below that, he goes on. He says, typical commission. And he's talking about how do we pay or compensate that role. Typical commission splits range from a low of 35-65 to a high of 60-40, or possibly beyond, depending on any unique circumstances. Now, a lot of people have used that as creative license to pay their people way out of whack, way out of range. And that's great if you want to go broke and you don't want to have a team anymore long-term, right? Because remember, what he's talking about here is how do we set up something that's sustainable over time, regardless of markets going up and down. You understand that it has to be a win for everybody. It has to be a win for the team because there's a lot of expense when it comes to the team. So look what he says here. The next sentence is key. However, you should know that going higher than a 50-50 can have extremely adverse effects on your economic model. And we strongly recommend against it. Now, what we've seen over time is a lot of teams try to come right out of the gates and they try to win and compete on price. It's no different if you're an agent and you're going up against other agents and somebody says, I'll take your listing for 1%. They're competing on price. What that tells me is they have no value to offer, and so they are strictly left to compete on price. And here's something that Bruce Hardy, Regional Director in the Northwest Region, big trainer in Keller Williams, most of you probably know Bruce. He told me this a long time ago. I love it. He said, there's always somebody willing to go out of business faster than you are. I'll say it again. There's always somebody willing to go out of business faster than you are. What he's saying is there's always somebody willing to undercut you. There's always somebody that will do it for less. There's always going to be somebody that will pay somebody more. It's not an issue of money, it's an issue of value because cost is only an issue in the absence of value. And so what we've seen is over time, a lot of teams make the mistake when they're not clear on their own value proposition, they make the mistake of giving all the money away and put these agents on incredibly high splits. And it sounds great and it works well to get people in the door. Yet even at high splits, if people aren't seeing value, if they're not seeing growth, if they're not seeing different things other than just monetary advantage, they'll leave. If they come for money, they'll leave for money. So that's what he's saying here. They recommend against it. 50-50 still to this day is still the best, economically speaking, the best share. And we're going to talk about that from a buyer's agent perspective as well. When you're an agent on a team, if I'm speaking to you as an agent on a team, when you're looking at your economic model, you're sharing with a team 50-50, absolutely. Yet the thing most people don't tend to take into consideration is you have zero expense or next to zero expense. So when we're looking at these models, we want to look at net income, a net percentage of our gross income. And what we know is for a lot of people, not all, and I don't care if you're a single agent or a team agent, if you have no desire to be on a team or if you never want to leave a team, it doesn't matter to me. But there are a lot of people who are on teams who are netting more than the team owner themselves because they don't have any of the expense. They get access to all the tools and systems, and they get to build a big business in the time they choose to give it. So that's what we're talking about here is net percentage. What is the correlation of these numbers? Now, right below that, and I literally have it circled and starred and all kinds of stuff. So that's how important this is. He says operating expenses are divided into 9 broad categories. Now underline this next sentence. There is no miscellaneous category. I repeat, there is no miscellaneous category. All expenses should be accounted for. Now what's he saying there? He's saying that there's a lot of agents who, for ease of accounting or because they are lazy or because they want to hide bad decisions in spending, they like to throw and lump things into a miscellaneous category. And the problem with that is that absolutely allows for what we call expense creep. That absolutely allows for you to spend more money than you should on things that have little to no chance of giving you a return. How accountable are you holding your expenses? Now, he goes on to say they're in Appendix A, which Appendix A in your book is page 349. And on page 349 is the start of Appendix A. In Appendix A, he gives you the chart of accounts for the MREA. And this has, he says, with more than 135 categories of expenses. Bottom line, you will find a place to put the expense. You may not love it, and it's maybe painful because it's going to bring to light the fact that you spent money where you shouldn't. But bottom line is you don't get a pass. You don't get to just put something to a miscellaneous category. You need to, or we should. Best practice is that we account for every expenditure and we categorize it correctly. Now, at the top of page 195, this is big. He says, when you look closely at the budget model, you'll notice that of the 9 categories, 2 account for the lion's share of the operating expense. We call these the big 2. And on the top of page 195, you're going to see figure 41. And those big 2 are salaries and lead generation. Now for a visual, flip back, if you will, to page 193 with me. Page 193. Now on page 193, you're going to see the budget model of the MREA actually visually broken out for you. And it's going to show you that the first, at the top, the first is cost of sales. Now again, we talked about this on a previous video. We went through the budget model, the basic budget model. Cost of sales, this is the cost of acquiring the income and includes the salary and commission of a listing specialist and the commission of buyer specialists. So we know this includes the cost of getting the revenue. That's why it's called cost of sale. Now, the second part, right below this, operating expense. And again, remember, it's broken into 9 main categories. Here are those 9 categories. He says, this is the cost to generate operating expenses. This is the cost to generate leads and run the business. Now, what we know is at the very bottom, for you visual people, the very bottom of 183, he gives a pie graph, and it shows you the breakdown of how all of this stuff plays out in the bigger picture. You're going to see that salaries equate to 41.4%. And remember, these percentages are percentages of gross income. So 41.1% salaries, 31.5% lead generation. Now, what's interesting, you flip back to 195, those big 2, you can see that total 72.6% of your gross income goes to those 2 categories. Guys, this is why it's so important that we hold our money accountable. This is why, and it's so important that we're putting stuff in the correct categories. This is why it's so important that we're following models. Because just operating, opening up shop, and being ready to do business, we've already accounted for 72.6% of our gross income just in salaries and in lead generation. Guys, you understand the margin in this business gets skinny quickly. Now, I want to share these numbers with you guys. Now, 157, the budget model, so that was before we were looking at it. So page 157, the budget charts, he kind of gives averages, right? And he interviewed over 110 agents to get these averages. So they're not just a theory, they're practical. But for the sake of clarity, Gary simplified the MREA budget model this way. 30%, because it's 29.2, but we're going to just simplify it, right? 30% should be cost of sales, 30% should be expenses, and 40% should be net income. Now that's the MREA model. 30% cost of sales, 30% expenses, 40% net income. Now, that's assuming that there are team members, that you have a team, right? Because if you're non-team, if you're just a solo agent, you don't have some of those expenses. So for the individual agent or the solo agent, here are your numbers. The model gets even simpler. As a solo agent, your expenses should be 30% and your net income should be 70%. Now, just hopefully you wrote those down. Look at the difference between those two. The net income of the MREA is 40%. The net income of the single agent is 70%. And I know a lot of people, when they see that, they think, as I've heard them say, they think, oh, well, see, I should never build a team. I'm just going to be a single agent. And my friend Ben Kinney said it this way. He said, would you rather have 10% of a watermelon or 100% of a grape? You understand that percentages are all relative. So as a single agent, 70% net income sounds great as a percentage. Look at what the number actually represents. If it's 70% of 2 deals, that's not a big number. Whereas the MREA might do 200, 300, 500 deals, 40% of that number is a really big number. Again, which would you rather have? 10% of a watermelon or 100% of a grape? It's relative. Keep that in mind as we're looking at these percentages. The MREA is doing a big business. They're doing lots of units and big volume. So while the percentage is lower, the income is significantly higher. And they have other people doing a lot of the work for them. Now, it doesn't mean being a solo agent is good or bad. It doesn't mean being a team is good or bad. It just means there's a difference there. And so when you're looking at these numbers, keep that in mind. Now, he goes on to say, middle of page 195, staffing productivity becomes an even larger issue if you now include your cost of sales as a part of your staffing compensation costs. The compensation you pay your seller listing specialist and buyer specialist above the line in cost of sales accounts for another 29.2% of your gross income. Combine that with the big two, and you'll see that lead generation and compensation as a whole add up to over half of your gross income. Compensation is a full 40%, so what's your aha? Well, he gives it to you here. Now you can see why we place so much emphasis on lead generation that leads to listings and leverage as it pertains to your staff. These issues have a remarkable impact on the overall welfare of your business. In fact, they are your business. Guys, that's why he spends so much time in this book talking about this, because this is your business. Everything else happens as a result, but the decisions made here, your focus and energy put in here to these numbers, to this model, dictate your success in a very big way. So how close and intimate are you with the numbers of your business? How close and intimate are you with the expenses of your business? Do you have your budget model set up? And if not, there's no better time to start than right now. Get your budget put together, get your budget model working for you. And remember, like we talked about, you can go to if you're a Keller Williams agent, you can go to your local office, your market center, and talk to your MCA, the CFO of the office, and ask them for the downloadable chart of accounts. And then if you use QuickBooks, you can upload that into QuickBooks, and all of a sudden your QuickBooks matches all of the chart of accounts in Appendix A automatically. And so now you can speak apples to apples with other agents across the country, because now all of a sudden it doesn't matter whether they're in a market that has way higher price points or way lower price points. When we're using the same chart of accounts, we're speaking the same language. And now when we're comparing cost of sales and expenses and what percentage is salaries and what percentage is all of these now start correlating directly right across the line. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of it, and it makes all of us on the level playing field. It takes all of us to speaking the same dialect, and now we can really compare apples to apples and have productive conversations when we're talking about our business with other agents. Now at the bottom of 195, as we're wrapping this up, he says, what we've discovered through research and experience, however, is no matter where you are in the continuum, meaning on the process of single agent or all the way to the MREA agent, no matter where you are in the continuum, the percentages remain remarkably stable. Now, as we're wrapping this up, guys, here's what I know. I know that Gary and Jay and the research team are still actively doing research for the update or the rewrite of MREA. And what I can tell you is it's really interesting is as they were doing that research, I think most of them were fully anticipating that there would be a lot of stuff they'd have to change. And what's fascinating so far about the research they have done or are doing is how little is actually changing. To his point at the end of this section on 195, the percentages remain remarkably the same. Guys, it was true when he wrote it, and it's still amazing and remarkable how unchanged those percentages really are. Percentages don't change over time as much as we would think. So know the percentages, know what they are in relation to, know what they mean to you, track your expenses, categorize those expenses correctly, and you're well on your way to building an MREA business. Thank you guys for being here. Next week, next Friday, we're going through session number 9, believe it or not, session number 9, the organizational model. And this is going to be pages 196 through 216. So next week, the organizational model, pages 196 to 216. Thank you guys for being on the call today. Please join the Facebook Mastermind group if you have not yet, and we'll look forward to talking to you next week.